Hello and welcome to the United States of America. We're in the very northern territory of Canada. They even speak a different language here. It's all a bit bizarre, but we're in Mont-Saint-Anne to cover this weekend's World Cup. Now, the track is nearly as old as time itself, and we've got some very yellow pits, some very yellow bikes, but what is everyone else running this weekend? Well, let's go have a look around to find out. And honestly, some of them just don't even admit they're American. It's absolutely bizarre. Now, behind us are the Norco pits. Now, they're having a pretty good season, particularly under junior female Gracie Hemstreet. And they're riding that downhill version of the range Enduro bike. So instead of it being 170, it's, I believe, around 200 mil all round. Although it uses the same platform, but with some tweaks to the linkage. So last weekend in Snowshoe, we saw Kirk McDowell running the alloy prototype of what I assume to be the new Aurum. Because this range probably won't ever see production in terms of its downhill shape. And on this bike, they did have full telemetry. It was very much smoke and mirrors, had a full canvas over there to disguise what the linkage is, but it looked to be that sort of inverted forebar that you find on the range. Now, I find it quite interesting because speaking to the mechanics a couple of weeks ago, they were saying that they're not just changing the stroke length and changing one piece of the linkage to get this trail bike to downhill spec. So I can only assume this new Aurum, if that's what it is much more of a ground up redesign of the same philosophy that made the range such a great trail bike. So behind us are the NS pits, and we can see George Brannigan's bike with that new 6-bar configuration. Now, the reason you might run a 6-bar is to offer a greater level of tunability. But what I find is quite interesting is we saw last year Polygon, a bit of a tangent here, but Polygon going to a 6-bar system on their trail bike. And NS, for a long time, before they were NS bikes, were Polygon racing. So I wonder if that was in the works with this team and they've tried to bring a similar technology to this bike. You can actually see on this rear side of that new suspension plate, on that component there is some bolts. So that could mean it's maybe made for an idler attachment. But currently they're running the O-chain just to separate the suspension forces from the drivetrain and all that pedal kickback you can get with bikes that have a particularly rearward axle path, which I've heard is the case with this bike. So last time we were at Forbidden, they told us to go away, and being the non-confrontational soy boys that we are, we did just run away. But this time, we mean business. We're gonna ask really nicely and then run away. So we asked really nicely and they told us to go away, and we said, ooh, you're not gonna be in our tech video, and they just said, leave us alone. And here we are. So we're standing outside the pit. Now, this bike has been ridden at the last couple of World Cups by Connor Fearon. And from what we can see from him riding it and the way that it works, is it does have a pivot in that rear end, which makes it different from the Dreadnought or the Druid. And again, it is that kind of upside down forebar that you do find similar on the Norco range, and even that alloy prototype that they're working on. The bike looks, and the rumour is, has a lot of adjustability. What that means, only time will tell. But again, I do think it is really good to see downhill bikes, which obviously being built to race lots of different racetracks, not just one, to have more adjustability. It makes absolute sense to me. So behind us are the Intense pits, and as you can see with their flag proudly displayed, they're on their second home race on the bounce in the state of Canada. And that must be really nice to race in front of their home fans. And they've been on this kind of long road of prototyping with that alloy downhill bike. And it looks like it's had another stage of refinement recently. Talking to the team, it sounds like they've kind of narrowed their window of geometry that they're looking for and kind of given each rider their particular setup. And also there's small refinements, such as now there's basically holes in the down tube, or at least that kind of hull of the bike, which will basically enable you to access compression and rebound settings on those Fox shocks, which is something that you actually couldn't do before. You had to remove the shock. And that's all part of the prototyping process. Now, for those of you wondering when this bike will see production, word on the street is it might actually just be a stepping stone and a learning process, and taking that learning to another platform entirely. But only time will tell with that one. They're still cracking on, and they do seem to be in the ascendancy of results with their riders, some of them really getting back to form indeed. But as we talk about these new bikes, we also kind of thought about the subject of how much weight, well, how much would a downhill bike weigh? And why on earth would you ever want to add weight to a downhill bike? So I just thought, instead of me just rambling on, let's go ask some people that actually do know what they're talking about. And so we asked the great and the good of the mechanics why on earth they would ever add weight to a downhill bike. We're here with Lyle Hislop at Santa Cruz Syndicate, and we're kind of asking him why you potentially want to make a downhill bike heavier, and is it important where the weight is located? So what are you guys getting onto?
A couple of us are running it, and we've all tried it. It's nothing new as well. So it's just like I think people should be aware of is that it's like an old trick. But I think the resurgence is kind of due. A lot of people spend a lot more time on e-bikes. They weigh a ton and all the weight's sunk down low, so it just creates a more planted ride feel. Like the bike's a bit stuck to the ground.
Are you putting all your weight in the bottom bracket shell or around the BB area?
We've currently got it just under the down tube protector, just because that's the easiest place to fit it. You can melt it down and put it inside your crank spindle. Basically anywhere in the middle and as low as you can get it, the better.
And do you think that downhill bikes, I mean, it was a long time ago, but I think that last generation of the Trek Session, the 26-inch one, it got down to like well below 30 pounds.
Yeah.
Do you think you can go too light on a downhill bike?
Yeah, I mean, for example, those snapped every 3 turns, so that wasn't a great choice for them. But
I think it's been long enough. Like the statute of limitations has passed. We can say which bikes are snapped.
Yeah, I think so. It's like everything in downhill. Everything's a compromise. If your bike's heavy, it's planted and stable, but it might not accelerate as quickly. And then the flip side of that is that the lighter it is, the more horsepower you can put down, the more quicker it'll accelerate. So.
Because when's Greg going to be on the 32-inch?
He'd tell you what, he'd test it if there was one. If there was tyres, mate, we'd have tested it already, I reckon.
So we're here with John Hall, Aaron Gwynn's mechanic. Now you're on this journey of developing this aluminium prototype bike. Sure. There's obviously a lot of metrics to measure performance. How does weight sit within that for you?
Weight is certainly important for us. For downhill bikes, they're obviously out of the entire lineup of bikes available to people from cross-country downhill are obviously going to be the heaviest, but it's not, you don't want it to be super heavy. There are some advantages to it though. You don't want a bike to be too light. I think there's pretty good consensus out there that if it's too light, it can be a bit unpredictable or twitchy and stuff like that. So with a bit of weight comes a bit of stability. It's just finding kind of that fine balance that works for the athletes and general consumer.
So we're here with Jordy Cortez at Fox. Now Jordy, every weekend riders come in saying they want loads of small bump, loads of mid-stroke and an end stroke, and it will be absolutely fantastic. How do you interpret weight's role in that? Would you prefer somebody to come up to you and have a heavier bike? Because some of the weights we're dealing with aren't large, like, speaking to some of these teams and they're adding merely like 300 grams. Do you think it puts you in a better footing to get a good setup if your bike is slightly heavier? Not taking into account all the places where it might make it worse, but just in terms of suspension?
I don't think it makes any difference. I feel like, again, it's such a small percentage of what you're dealing with. If you took that weight and added it in somewhere that made a difference, as in chassis dynamics or hub build strength or spoke strength or something like that, you'd probably get a difference. But if you're talking about sticking a lead bar through the BB, I would be extremely surprised if it made any difference at all. I mean, we've tested back to forth, and while you can tell a difference, that doesn't mean that it's better.
Yes. But yeah, that's the kind of pits at Mont-Saint-Anne. Now, we actually didn't make a video last week in Snowshoe just because the day got away from us, and listen, we're here for speculation and, ramblings, not organisation and professionalism. However, I do think we got perilously close again to some actual insight and journalism regarding the weight our mountain bike should be. And I think it's an interesting thing because, especially on a downhill bike, obviously we ride it for stability and you don't have to climb it, etc., etc. But also the front centre is so much longer because on some of the e-bikes, when you have a lot of weight crammed into that down tube, even though it is relatively low and it can reap, huge benefits in terms of suspension performance, it can also mean that your weight is almost a risk of overtaking the front wheel, especially when you get on the brakes on something steep. So it is a fine art. And it's interesting that some of these bikes, the aluminium bike probably weighs, say, 200 or 300 grams more for the frame than the carbon one. And then we get the carbon bikes and we're just putting 200, 300 grams. But then again, I suppose you could argue that carbon isn't merely about lightweight, but also freedom of design, because you're not limited by just classic tubing like you are on an alloy bike, and you can largely just draw it where you want. If you do see some of the more complicated alloy bikes, they do often have about 15 kilometers of welds running up and down the frame compared to the smooth, sleek looks of a carbon frame. Now, that's it from us this week at this race. It's dry so far, and here's to hoping it holds, because I just don't want to wash any more bikes. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time. Well, one place for a light bike is it keeps it in your 23 kilogram baggage, eh? Where are all your 23 kilogram bags?
Well, the important one, which was a release today, Nomad, that's been missing for a month.
How many bikes this season have you lost?
I lost 2, but I got 1 back pretty quickly through United. But the one that got away is still out there.
If anyone is from KLM, I'm pretty sure they're watching, or Lufthansa. If you're watching, Mr. Lufthansa, can we get Jordy's bike back? Because it's important.
Of no contact from anyone. They won't
No
answer the phone.
Oh no!
I even flew back to Dublin to get it when it was there, and they were like, "Nah, you can't do it. It's in process."
Well, he's probably not watching this because he's out riding his brand new Nomad, but or he or she, whoever they are. But anyway, well, let's hope it gets back in one piece eventually.
I sure hope so.